There are approximately 24 million veterans in the United States, and of those, over 11 million are under the age of 60. These are people who are prime candidates for the civilian workforce. And as most of you know, and probably some of you are in your second careers, when they leave the military, they do tend to move into the civilian workforce. The vast majority seek civilian employment. With the downsizing of the military, over 1.5 million service members are expected to transition over the next 4 to 5 years. That's a huge number. Typically, it's about 200,000 that transition out of the service, and so we're looking at a huge increase in the number of service members who will be leaving. And then this is probably something I don't need to tell this audience, but service members are highly trained. Don spoke about a lot of the attributes of service members and veterans that I think everybody recognizes, some things that we kind of call soft skills, leadership, teamwork, collaboration, that sort of thing. But service members come with a lot of technical skills as well. The military invests tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars in training its military personnel. These folks have the ability to attend some of the most high quality training that you'll find in the United States. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is that unemployment among veterans is still relatively high. The numbers have come down recently, which is a good thing, and I think can be attributed to some of the different initiatives that are currently underway. But the folks coming out after their first term of service, the younger veterans in the 18 to 24-year-old age range, still have very high numbers of unemployment. Some of them up to, some of the numbers show almost a third of them are unemployed. So why is it that these folks who are highly trained and have all these fantastic attributes, why is it that they're not getting jobs? The Society for Human Resource Management shows that, did a survey recently, and it showed that 60% of employers said that one of the biggest challenges of hiring transitioning service members and veterans is their ability to translate their skills to military occupations. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There are a number of different tools that are out there that can be used. I'm not going to go over them in a lot of detail, but I will touch on them at the end because I think there are some particularly good ones. And the focus here is more on helping you understand that for almost any job that you might be offering, there's a qualified and a ready veteran out there to attain that job. So what do inquiring employers want to know? We're going to talk a little bit about the experience that service members and veterans bring to the civilian workforce. We're going to talk about in more detail the training and education that they receive, a lot of it highly technical training that can directly match your civilian jobs. We're going to talk a little bit more about the extent to which civilian credentialing, and here I'm talking about occupational licenses and certifications, apply to service members and veterans. Many employers are looking for folks who have specific credentials, and a lot of these people have them with some of the initiatives that are underway. And then, as I said, we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools that are out there. So what types of experience? Before we get into discussing the types of job duties that service members perform, for those of you, I suspect there's a lot of veterans in here, and so I'm preaching to the choir. But for those of you who aren't as familiar with military personnel and military occupations, I thought I'd do just a quick military 101. As most of you are probably aware, there's really two primary personnel categories for military personnel. There's enlisted and then there's officers. As the enlisted move up in the ranks, they become non-commissioned officers and carry out a lot of the fundamental duties of the military. The enlisted population makes up 82% of the military population, so they are the bulk of the people who will be leaving the service. Typical education level upon entry to service, most enlisted members go in with only a high school diploma. Some may have college education, but what we see is by the time they leave the service, over 50% have at least an associate's degree, and those that have been in longer have bachelor's degrees and even graduate degrees. The last thing down here, I'm not sure how well you can see it, is the ability, it's commenting on the ability for them to be able to show the transferability of their military skills and experience. And what we're finding is it's the enlisted folks that tend to have the most difficulty doing that. The officers can encounter issues too, but the enlisted folks, because of their job titles and their job duties, it's a little bit more difficult sometimes for those folks to show a civilian employer, the comparability of their military training and experience. So most of the initiatives that I've been involved with most recently are focused primarily on the enlisted, so I'll be talking about them for the most part. A little bit more military 101. For those of you in HR, you're probably familiar with occupational classification systems. If you're in the federal government, you're familiar with the federal occupational classification system. The military services all have their own occupational classification system. So that can make it somewhat complicated as an employer. If you're looking at a resume and somebody says that they were a 92 Golf food service specialist, what does that mean? So in the Army, the enlisted occupations are called military occupational specialties, or MOSs. The officers have are either warrant officers or commissioned officers, and the warrant officers have MOSs as well. The officers typically call their occupational areas of concentration. The Navy has ratings for enlisted and designators for officers. The Air Force has an AFSC, or an Air Force Specialty Code, that indicates what your military occupation is. And then the Marine Corps, like the Army, uses MOS. The bottom down here shows you an example. So if you're an employer and you're looking for a construction laborer, in the Army, you may be looking for a 51 Bravo, a carpentry and masonry specialist. In the Navy, you may be looking for a BU, a builder. And you can see some of the other terms. So because of the lack of consistency across the services, that can make it even more difficult sometimes for a civilian employer to really understand the military lingo. This shows some of the officer occupational categories. It may be a little bit hard to read from back there, but you can see they cover a wide variety of occupational areas: transportation, support services, HR, healthcare is big. I like to say, and this is showing especially with the enlisted folks, that the military is really a microcosm of the civilian workforce. The range of jobs in the military is tremendous. You have everything from cooks to electronic technicians to plumbers to welders, healthcare specialties. Most of the Air Force, Army, and Navy provide the healthcare services, and they have over 30 different enlisted healthcare occupational specialties. Very highly trained individuals. HR, law enforcement, you name it, the military does it pretty much. These are the top 10 enlisted occupational specialties in FY12, actually. We identified these when we were doing some work for the Department of Defense, because they were undertaking a number of initiatives to help people transition to the civilian workforce, and they really wanted to focus on the populations that were in greatest need. And so interestingly, these are the folks these are the occupational areas that have the most individuals in them. If you look at the unemployment statistics by military occupation, you'll see that these are the same ones that are represented in the top 10 for unemployment. So these are really the folks who are in most need right now. You've got aircraft mechanics, you can see computer support, IT, truck drivers. The last category that I have on here is military specific, and that is maybe a little confusing, but basically the Department of Defense has a crosswalk, and it matches military occupations to civilian jobs. Not every military occupation has a direct civilian equivalent, though. Some of them, like infantry, field artillery, that sort of thing, they don't have a direct civilian occupational equivalent, but it doesn't mean that they don't have transferable skills. And that's something that I think is very important, and we'll talk about a little bit more. The Army and the Marine Corps are the two services that have the most military-specific occupational areas. In the Army, the infantryman, the 11 Bravo, is the #1 most populated military occupation. I think I've addressed that. Let's see. So what do these folks bring to the table? And again, now this is talking about any service member, but particularly thinking about those who are in occupations that are a little bit more difficult to translate. They all bring the kinds of values and attributes that Don was talking about. They have a lot of highly technical skills. What you need to think about is, in particular, things like in the infantry, well, in any military occupational specialty, as they move up in the ranks, they become trainers, instructors. They have all kinds of leadership, supervisory, managerial skills. They also take on additional duties, collateral duties they call, and those kinds of things may lend themselves to civilian jobs as well. You can see it's things like command financial specialist, field recruiter, which can be considered HR-oriented, safety technician. The cyberspace workforce is very big. It's a very big focus right now. And there are individuals in a variety of military occupational specialties, not just the IT-oriented ones, who have duties because they're working within the networks. They have cybersecurity duties. So that's something to consider as well. So what type of training and education do service members have? In the military, they make sort of a fine distinction between training and education. Basically, training is anything that's considered mandatory. So it's part of what you do in order to attain and retain your military occupational specialty. It tends to be mission related. So in some instances, you'll have military occupations that have a civilian equivalent that is very closely matched, but there still could be some gaps between the military training and the civilian requirements because the civilians do things that aren't as directly related to the military mission. And they have both formal and informal training throughout the entire life cycle, and we'll talk about that in a second. When we talk about education, we're usually talking about a voluntary offering that's available to service members to get degrees, to get certifications, a lot of different things. And this is why you hear folks who are going into the military are going in order to take advantage of some of the educational opportunities that are made available to them. What we're seeing now with the post-9/11 GI Bill, you can transfer your benefits to your spouse or your children. We're seeing more service members trying to take advantage of educational opportunities while they're in the service so that they can transfer their benefits to their spouse or children when they leave. Education, in some instances, the services will require that the voluntary education that they pay for be related to your military occupation. In other instances, it doesn't have to necessarily be. It could be a completely different occupational area. Thus, all of the services have career roadmaps that are designed to help service members progress up the ranks, and they're usually very specific. The Navy, for example, has learning and development roadmaps, and it says at every skill level and at every pay grade what kinds of educational opportunities are most applicable to you, and it gives you resources that are available to help you meet those educational objectives. Military training, I mentioned earlier that it's very high-tech in a lot of instances. They spend a lot of money on military training. After basic training, individuals go to what might be called A school or AIT, Advanced Individualized Training, and this is their MOS qualifying training. This is where they get all of their basic skills in order to perform their MOS. Those can range from anywhere from 8 weeks to a year long. It can be very intensive training. As they progress throughout their career, they're continuously given additional training opportunities or required to take additional training. And again, as they move up and become in the enlisted side, on the NCO side, they get a lot of the leadership training in particular. This little factoid on the side, more than 60% of military training qualifies for college credit. The services have gone to great lengths to make sure that service members can get credit for their military training. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes about the evaluation process that's been set up so that they can get college credit. Voluntary education, I mentioned earlier, they provide tuition assistance. The Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps can take advantage of something called Service Members Opportunity Colleges. That is a consortium of civilian universities that have come together and have agreed to various things like waiving residency requirements, offering distance learning, and accepting military training for college credit. So this helps them get a degree, and it gives them a leg up because they're actually getting the credit that they for the military training as well.
Is that something for veterans recently separated? Or?
This is for service members. It's oriented towards service members.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The Air Force does not participate in SOC because they have what's called the Community College of the Air Force. It is an accredited community college. So basically when somebody's going through training, they're continually getting college credit towards an associate's degree, and then they can take maybe a few more Gen Ed type courses and actually get a degree awarded to them by CCAF. The military evaluations program, this is what I was referencing earlier. The military has, the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps have contracted with the American Council on Education for them to review their military training and make college credit recommendations. And ACE is a pretty widely recognized nonprofit organization that colleges trust and will agree to accept their college credit recommendations. There are some initiatives underway to make sure that colleges better understand how those college credit recommendations are made so that they can give maximum credit to the military training. Because the Air Force has the CCAF, they don't participate in the ACE credit recommendation process, but they are awarded, they're actually awarded college credit through the CCAF. And that can transfer to any university that's willing to accept it, which is a key. Credentialing opportunities I'm going to talk about a little bit more. Another factoid, each year about 300,000 service members sign up for post-secondary courses. This is something that's very common and very prevalent. So credentials, to what extent do civilian occupational certifications and licenses apply to service members and veterans? Before I get into that in any detail, I just wanted to talk a little bit and talk about the differences between the different types of credentials. Professional certification, you all are probably familiar with. It tends to be a voluntary credential that someone can achieve. They're usually issued by a professional association or probably a proprietary company like Microsoft or Cisco in the IT area. And they're designed to show competency in a particular occupational field. Federal and state licensing is a mandatory credential. In other words, you can't practice in the civilian workforce without that license for some occupational areas. I'm sure most of you are familiar at the federal level with, well, certainly pilots, aviation mechanics, number of different federal licenses. At the state level, states can license anything they want. We've been working with the state of Illinois recently. They have over 200 occupational licenses. Not all of them match military occupations, I can tell you that right now. They've got, here was this crazy one I saw recently. Hair braider, a licensed hair braider. Hadn't heard of that before.
I can use one.
Yeah? And then the third form of credentialing that we talk about is apprenticeship, which is, as most of you are aware, a form of on-the-job training combined with classroom learning, and you can progress from a journeyman to a master level. That's highly applicable to the trades, the trade occupations, and there are a number of apprenticeship opportunities available to service members. So why is credentialing important for service members and veterans? In the service, it contributes to their professional growth. It's often tied to their career ladders, and if you get a particular credential in some of the services, you can get promotion points for that. But it's probably even more important, and I think this is what the recent focus has been on credentialing for transitioning service members, because it really demonstrates to that civilian employer that the skills they attained through their military training are on par with the kinds of training and experience that their civilian counterparts get. So that's a very important reason for attaining credentials. There are, as I said, a lot of different initiatives currently underway to promote credentialing of service members and veterans. I have been working in this area since the mid-1990s, and we've seen a tremendous mind shift in the Department of Defense. When we first start, and Stan, you'll remember the Interagency Task Force on Licensing and Certification, the services came to the table. This was federal agencies that might play some role in veterans programs or licensing. And the services came to the table very reluctantly, and they said, why would we want to get somebody a certification or a license, a civilian certification or license? Wouldn't that be like giving them a ticket out the door? Their mindset has changed dramatically. The services are now using certifications very much in the way they have always used more traditional forms of education, degrees, that kind of thing. They use it for recruiting. They use it to professionalize their workforce. They use it for retention. Sometimes a service member can't receive a particular credential unless they've stayed in for more than one term of service. So that's an incentive for them to stay. And that last bullet says training. It should say transition. Transition is probably what the major focus is right now on credentialing. And it's really become sort of the currency of choice for showing employers how equivalent their military training is. These are just a few of the efforts that are currently underway. In the past 2 years, there has been a tremendous focus on credentialing of service members. The President formed the Veterans Employment Initiative Task Force in 2011. There were 4 different prongs related to that: education, employment, entrepreneurship, and transition. The education prong was focused almost entirely on credentialing, and there were a number of major initiatives that came out of that that set the stage for some of the current efforts that are underway. The Department of Defense has a credentialing and licensing task force that's been set up, and they're doing a number of pilot programs to help service members get the credentials that they need. And it's a nice, we had done work in this area for a long time where we'd matched military occupations to civilian certifications and made available resources that you could use to attain the credentials. Now what they're doing is they're working directly with credentialing agencies and employers to develop sort of bridge training programs. So, for example, if you are, right now there's 5 programs underway, an automotive mechanic. They're working with the American, ASE, I always forget that acronym, Automotive Service Excellence, to really get that credentialing agency. The ASE is something that you'll probably see at every service station that you go to. They want to hire people, civilian employers want to hire auto mechanics that have that ASE certification. So ASE is now working very closely with the military to look at where the military training aligns with their certification and where it doesn't, and to help find ways and cater programs that would fill the gaps for that training. About 3 weeks ago, I guess, the White House sponsored a variety of credentialing roundtables, and they brought together stakeholders, including credentialing agencies, employers, unions, veterans organizations, the military, a wide variety of stakeholders to look at credentialing in 3 areas in particular: emergency medical technicians, advanced medical occupations, some of the more specialized occupational areas, and truck drivers. There has been tremendous interest at the state level as well in finding ways to make it easier for service members to get the credit for state licensing. More recently, for example, I think we're up to 47 states have adopted a policy that allows them to waive the practical exam for commercial truck drivers' licenses. So for a service member coming out who practiced as a truck driver and say an 88 Mike in the Army, they can now go to states and they don't have to take the practical exam in order to, and that's a big deal because what they used to have to do is bring in an 18-wheeler on their own expense to show that they could handle the practical skills. So that was a big deal. There's a lot of other legislation out there, state legislation, that requires state licensing agencies to recognize equivalent military training and experience. And the states are looking at some innovative ways of doing that. So what tools are available to employers to assess the transferability of military training and experience? I'm going to show you a couple. How are we doing on time? Are we okay, Billy? We move. I'll show you. I can move for this pretty quickly. The Army and Navy Cool initiatives I mentioned earlier, they're near and dear to my heart because we've been working with them for, the Army's for more than 10 years now. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. The ACE college credit recommendations, that's another tool that the services have used to get credit for military training. The military transcripts, I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but there are some standardized types of documentation that are available to service members to document their training, education, and experience. So if you as an employer need to verify their training or experience, you can ask them to provide something either called their the VMET 2586 is the verification of military experience and training, and it is a document that shows for the life of the individual's military career what military occupations they've held, the job duties that they performed. It'll tell them if there's college credit been recommended for their military training or experience. And another document that's very, very helpful to service members as well is the military transcripts. For the folks that the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, they have just recently gone to what's called a joint service transcript, and it's issued by the American Council on Education, and it also details the training in quite a bit of, at quite a detailed level. The Community College of the Air Force also offers a transcript, so that's something that would be useful to request. And some service members aren't even aware that these types of documentation are available to them, so it's helpful sometimes as an employer to say, do you have this available to you? Or if you're helping somebody prepare a resume, ask them to request these. They can go online and request them, and it helps them remember what they've done, and it helps them develop the verbiage for their resume. Transition Assistance Program, they're in the process of modifying that, and there's a lot of good things that are coming out of that as well. So these are some of the resources, and I'm hoping that maybe we can make this available to the folks that are here, Stan, via email. Those are all hyperlinks to the different tools that are out there. Since it sounds like we might be pressed a little bit for time, I'm not going to try to get into them in a lot of detail, but I will highlight a couple of them. The Department of Labor has had for quite some time a military to civilian occupational translator where you can put in a military occupational code and find out what the equivalent civilian occupation is. They have recently developed the reverse of that. So if a civilian employer wants to see what military occupations are related to a particular type of job for which they're hiring, they can go to this tool. You can put in your civilian occupation. You'll find out which military services have equivalent military occupations. You'll find the name of the occupation and a description of the duties. So you can kind of hone in on who you might be looking for in order to fill a specific vacancy. My Next Move for Veterans is another relatively new site that's been developed by the Department of Labor. It has a lot of good information for the veteran from the military occupational standpoint, and it also links them to various job boards where they can look for jobs that they might be qualified for. The Department of Veterans Affairs, I didn't highlight the website that I meant to, but at vetsuccess.gov, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, Billy, has tremendous amount of resources for employers as well as for individual service members and veterans. And then Maryland Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation, Sarah, created under a grant from the U.S. Department of Labor, created a military to federal jobs crosswalk. And I think I saw from the attendee list that there's a lot of federal agencies here, and I would very much encourage you to take a look at that. It provides two search functionalities similar to the ones I described for the Department of Labor, but it links the military occupation to specific federal occupations. So you can, and then if you're a civilian hiring manager, you can go in and do the reverse as well. If you've got a particular federal occupational classification for which you're trying to fill, then you can put that in there and it will show you all of the related military occupations that are associated with that. Pool, we've talked about a little bit. I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's a very information-rich website. Right now there's an Army and a Navy Pool. There will be an Air Force and a Marine Corps within the next year as well. That's some new initiatives. But it provides background information on civilian credentialing, but it links every military occupation to a civilian job, all of the certifications that are relevant to that job as well. And there's a gap analysis done. So if there is a particular civilian certification, you can go in and see what the requirements for the certification are, and then you can find out the extent to which the military training meets that requirement and if there are any gaps. As employers, again, I'd say, oftentimes the military occupation will translate directly to a civilian occupation. Occasionally, there may be some gaps. And what we're trying to encourage employers and training and academic institutions to do is to really focus just on the gaps. If there is a gap, don't make them repeat their training. We've already invested a lot of money in their training. Don't make them use their GI Bill to repeat their training that they've already received. Look for what the gaps are and see if maybe you can, as an employer, tailor a program that's designed to help them fill the gaps, perhaps through on-the-job training, through apprenticeship if that's the types of occupations that you're hiring. There are a variety of ways that you can do that. That's just the audience for cool. This is the Miltifed. I forgot I had some slides on that. Just shows you what that looks like. Now, this was developed for the Department of Labor in Maryland, but it applies. It has all military occupations on there. It links to USA Jobs as well so that you can find specific occupations nationwide. That's just shows the results. And that's it. Are there any questions that I could address? Yes.
As it pertains to the credentialing, does it offer special requirements for disabled veterans as well?
That hasn't been touched on very much, and it's going to depend on the occupational area. We're working again with primarily with the occupational areas, those top 10 occupational areas: aircraft maintenance, automotive, that kind of thing. As credentialing agencies become more aware of the needs, I can see that they're going to probably look towards tailoring that. But there hasn't been a whole lot done that I'm aware of that it's tailored specifically to disabled veterans. Anything else? Yes.
I have a question. Are there any websites, or can you direct us to say, like, I'm IT.
Okay.
So if I'm looking for IT veterans, is there like certain bases, certain targets?
Yeah,
That's been our difficulty.
that's a very common question. It's like we know they're out there, we don't know where they are. How do we find them? There's actually an IT initiative underway right now. That's one of the White House's primary objectives, and they are working very closely to try to match military to IT employers, and I can provide you with more information on that. I can give you. It's sort of in its infancy, but it was announced at the credentialing roundtables a few weeks ago. I also saw some draft legislation recently that's intended to do the same thing. So there is a very big focus on, again, because a lot of these folks are very highly trained. And in fact, one thing I didn't mention is in the IT area, many of the service members are actually mandated to hold specific IT certifications. So they are civilian IT certifications. So they're pretty highly qualified. So I'll send you some information on that. Yes?
If I could just add to that, excuse me, at the Warrior Project, we're on about a dozen installations in the Warrior Transition Battalions, where the wounded warriors are transitioning to the civilian life and going through their medical examinations and all that. And we offer programs free of charge to the warriors that get them to get their A+, their Net+, and their Security Plus certification, so that when they do transition, they're ready to go to work. And as part of our Warriors to Work program, we actually have 2 people who focus solely on IT transition to get those graduates into IT jobs. So,
Well, I'm interested in talking to you.
Yeah, that's good information. That's great. And the other thing I'd mention on the VA website, vetsuccess.gov, it's been a while since I've looked, and I don't know if you know, Billy, but I think they've got a resume bank for.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we got a VA for vets now too, so that's another.
There you go. Okay, good point. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you today.